Tonight, we're heading straight into the life of an Aztec warrior. From tough childhood training and strict rules to intense battles and the heavy choices they had to make. This is a world built on courage, honor, and survival. We're talking about the long days in the warrior's school, the fierce pride of bringing back a captive, and the quiet moments by the fire when doubts crept in. If you enjoy slipping into these midnight stories, feel free to like or subscribe, but only if it feels right for you. So, grab a warm drink, get comfortable, and let's explore what it really meant to grow up and fight as an Aztec warrior. Imagine a world where your first breath already carried the weight of the gods, where the morning light slipping through the reeds felt more like a sharp nudge than a gentle greeting. In the heart of the Aztec city, life wasn't something you eased into. It grabbed you by the shoulders before you could even learn to walk, shaking you awake to a rhythm of drums, prayers, and chores. A little boy might wake up on a mat so thin it barely felt like anything at all. The smell of burning wood, corn dough, and wet earth mixing together. It was the kind of scent that clung to your hair and your dreams. Before he even opened his eyes, he knew there would be work waiting. Maybe today he had to carry water from the canal, a pot balanced carefully on a small, wobbly back. Maybe he'd help grind maize with his mother, the rough stone biting into tiny hands. His father, already up, sharpening a blade or fixing fishing nets. His words sharp and quick like the obsidian knives they prized so much. A father's love came in small, fierce doses, a grunt of approval here, a quick nod there. No hugs, no gentle pats on the head. Too much softness, they believed, would turn a warrior into mush before he ever held a spear. Discipline started early. There were stories of mothers holding their children's faces over chilly smoke to make them strong, to teach them that pain was just another breath, another heartbeat. Imagine that, eyes watering, lungs burning, the world becoming a blurry, stinging memory before breakfast. Kids learned to stay quiet, to endure, to build a spine as straight as a temple staircase. But it wasn't all sharp edges. Between the chores and punishments, there were small moments that felt almost tender. A shared tortilla by the fire, a whispered joke about a neighbor's runaway turkey, laughter, quick and shy, echoing against mud brick walls. Even the strictest parents knew that a tiny ember of joy could keep a child's spirit alive through the toughest trials. When boys turned 7, their real education began. No books, no soft benches. Lessons came from scraped knees and sunburned shoulders. They learned to carry heavy bundles of firewood, to fetch water, to fish in murky canals while keeping an eye out for snapping turtles. Every day felt like a test, as if the gods themselves peeked over their shoulders, judging each stumble and misstep. Older boys started helping at the market, eyes wide at all the colors and noise. Shouting merchants, the sweet smell of roasted cacao, the sharp tang of fresh chili paste. The marketplace was a living thing, a giant heart beating at the center of their world. And in that chaos, they learned to watch people, to listen for gossip, to notice who owed who a favor. All small steps toward becoming men who understood not just war, but the delicate dance of survival. At home, girls learned their own tough rhythm, grinding maize until their arms ached, weaving with fingers so nimble they could tie knots in their sleep. They watched their mothers move through the house like quiet storms, efficient and steady. Even the little ones knew that every meal, every woven cloth, every pot mended held a story, 1,000 small sacrifices stitched into each ordinary day. By the time boys were ready for the warrior's school, they already carried invisible scars. Their hearts beat fast at the thought of real weapons, of songs sung before dawn that promised glory and pain in equal measure. Some secretly trembled, others buzzed with excitement, but none dared show fear. Not when every uncle, every cousin, every ancestor expected them to stand tall, even when their knees felt like wet clay. And so, before the first spear was ever thrown, these children were molded in fires hotter than any forge. Dreams of jaguar pelts and eagle feathers might flicker in their minds at night, but the path there was paved with splinters, cold baths, harsh words, and silent prayers whispered to the smoky stars above. The warrior school wasn't some fancy hall with shiny floors and echoing voices. It was more like a big, dusty training yard where boys learned to swap childhood games for heavy wooden swords and real bruises. You could hear the crack of practice weapons before you even stepped inside. The smell? A sharp mix of sweat, dirt, and the faint sweetness of crushed flowers left as offerings nearby. They started each morning before sunrise. While the rest of the city still snored under woven blankets, these boys were already stretching sore arms and tightening leather straps around their waists. Some mornings felt endless, the kind where your breath turned into steam in the cold air and your stomach growled like a caged dog. But no one complained. Complaining was for children, and they had left that title behind the moment they stepped through those gates. Drills looked simple from afar. March here, swing there, drop to the ground, jump up again. But after hours of repetition, legs turned to jelly and splinters dug deep into palms. The instructors, older warriors with scars that told stories of past glories and near misses, watched closely. One flick of an eyebrow and a boy knew he had to do better or feel the sting of a stick across his back. They taught them how to move silently, how to slip through a crowd without being seen. Because in battle, noise could mean death. They learned to track footsteps in soft dirt, to listen for the subtle crack of a twig, to read the tilt of a head that might betray a hidden blade. Every lesson felt like a puzzle. Each bruise, each scold, another piece falling into place. Even meals were tests, a thin porridge that barely filled the hollow of your belly. Some dried beans, a handful of maize. Just enough to keep a heartbeat going, but never enough to feel satisfied. They said hunger kept the spirit sharp, always reaching for more. And when night fell, they collapsed onto mats so thin they might as well have been sleeping on stones, muscles twitching from the day's punishments. Despite the hardship, you could catch glimpses of boyish wonder. After drills, some would mimic great warriors they had heard stories about, swinging invisible swords and shouting made-up battle cries. Others would sneak a smile when someone tripped over his own feet or fumbled a spear throw so badly that even the strictest instructor had to stifle a laugh. In these fleeting moments, they were still boys dreaming of bright feathers and victory songs. They imagined returning home draped in cloaks, neighbors whispering their names in awe. But the older boys knew better. They had seen what waited beyond the training yard. Real battles, where the ground drank blood and no one laughed at missed throws. Sometimes, at the edge of the yard, mothers would come to watch. Their eyes carried 1,000 silent prayers, each wrinkle a worry line for a future they couldn't control. They would bring small bundles of food, perhaps an extra tortilla or a few roasted beans, tucked inside colorful cloth. A boy might pretend not to care, shuffling away quickly, but you could always see the quiet relief in his shoulders. When dusk painted the sky in orange and purple, instructors lit small fires and retold stories of past heroes. Boys huddled close, eyes wide, soaking up every word as if they were sacred chants. Stories of warriors who returned with captives and won the gods' favor, or of young men who fell in battle but earned a place among the stars. Every scar became a badge, every lost friend a ghost woven into future dreams. By the time sleep finally came, it wasn't gentle. It grabbed them, yanked them into darkness, heavy and hard. They would drift off with echoes of drumbeats in their minds, their hands still twitching as if gripping a shield or throwing a spear in their dreams. Some nights, a boy might whisper into the blackness, wondering if he was strong enough, brave enough. But no one dared answer out loud. The darkness swallowed those fears, keeping them safe until dawn dragged them back to their endless dance of sweat, pain, and silent hopes. When the boys finally learned to wield real weapons, the shift was electric. Wooden swords were swapped for sharpened blades that gleamed like moonlight on water. Each weapon felt alive in their hands, heavy with the promise of triumph or failure. The first time a boy felt the true weight of a real sword, you could almost hear his heart stop for a second. It wasn't a toy anymore. Every swing now had a shadow of a future battle behind it. Older warriors stood nearby, arms crossed, scars twisting across their chests like silent warnings. They watched every move, every shaky breath. A single mistake could mean a cut that never healed right, a scar that told the story of a lesson learned the hard way. Some boys thrived under the pressure, moving with a spark in their eyes. Others stumbled, their dreams wobbling under the sheer gravity of the new reality. They practiced not just slashing and blocking, but how to circle an opponent, how to read the flicker of a foot or the twitch of a shoulder that hinted at an attack. Battle was a dance, they said, and a wrong step meant you'd be food for the dogs by sunrise. That kind of talk could make a boy's knees shake, but it also lit a strange fire in their bellies. They learned to shout chants that made their voices blend into a single rolling wave, a sound meant to rattle the enemy's bones before a single blade was lifted. At dusk, you could hear them echoing across the training yard, rising above the frog calls and the distant hum of city life. Some nights, those chants drifted into the neighborhoods, where families sat around low fires, imagining their sons out there, becoming legends. But away from the yard, life crept back in through the cracks. Boys still whispered jokes when instructors weren't looking. They snuck into each other's sleeping mats to trade ghost stories about warriors who lost their heads or turned into owls to haunt their enemies. Even the toughest among them sometimes cried quietly into their blankets, faces turned toward the wall so no one would see. They were boys with fragile hearts, hidden behind a growing shell of muscle and discipline. At home, mothers and sisters continued their quiet prayers. They wove cloaks with extra care, hoping each stitch might be a small shield against a spear point. Fathers pretended not to worry, throwing extra logs on the fire or sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. Everyone knew that once a boy left for the warrior's school, there was no turning back to the easy games of childhood. Ceremonies marked progress. A new feather here, a strip of colored cloth there. Each signaled a step closer to real combat. Some boys strutted with pride, adjusting their small trophies in the mirror-like surface of a water bowl. Others moved more quietly, carrying their new honors like a heavy stone pressed against their chests. At night, when the city slept, boys would dream of returning home in triumph, carrying a captured enemy, their names rising in chants across the market. They saw themselves draped in bright cloaks, their families showering them with maize cakes and songs. But in those same dreams, there were shadows, the faces of enemies, the sting of a blade, the cold grip of fear that never quite left their bones. As the days blurred into months, and the months slipped into years, each boy transformed. By the time they stood on the edge of the real battlefield for the first time, they were no longer the clumsy kids who dropped maize or tripped over fishing nets. Their eyes were sharper, their hearts heavier, their minds echoing with 1,000 silent lessons whispered under starlit skies. And just like that, the line between child and warrior vanished, swallowed by the sound of drums and the scent of blood waiting beyond the horizon. The first time a boy stepped onto a real battlefield, the world tilted. The ground felt alive under his feet, humming with hidden fear and wild hope. The air tasted different too, sharp, metallic, full of sweat and burning incense drifting from nearby altars. Drums pounded like an endless heartbeat in the sky, so loud it felt like they were drumming straight into your chest. They stood in tight ranks, shoulder to shoulder, eyes flicking nervously toward the horizon, where enemy banners rippled like restless snakes. Some boys clenched their fists so hard their nails dug deep into their palms. Others whispered prayers under their breath, words slipping past dry lips and vanishing into the rising sun. The older warriors strutted forward, their cloaks shimmering with feathers and bright threads. You could tell who had returned with captives before. Their heads high, movements smooth, an invisible wall of pride around them. These seasoned fighters shouted jokes to each other, smirking as if they were about to join a festival rather than a fight to the death. A young warrior's task wasn't to kill but to capture. Bringing an enemy back alive meant everything. It meant glory, new clothes, respect, and a chance to move up the social ladder. Killing was easy, they said. Catching someone alive took real courage and skill. But try telling that to a boy standing face to face with an enemy whose eyes burned like coals. When the first clash finally came, all those practice drills dissolved like morning mist. The screaming started instantly, sharp, high-pitched, raw. Spears clattered against shields, obsidian blades flashed under the sun, and boys felt the earth kick up into their mouths and eyes. Some moved with unexpected grace, instincts taking over where lessons left off. Others froze, legs locked, hearts hammering so loudly they thought the enemy could hear. Those who managed to grab a captive felt a jolt run through their whole body. A shock, a surge, a strange mix of horror and triumph all at once. Dragging a struggling enemy back toward the line felt like pulling a wild dog on a fraying leash. Every step heavy, every heartbeat echoing the drums above. Meanwhile, the smell of blood mixed with the dusty earth, a thick perfume of life and death swirling around every movement. You could taste it in the back of your throat, that iron tang that no one ever really got used to. Stories told in the training yard didn't prepare them for this symphony of terror and adrenaline. After the battle, they gathered on the field. Boys turned into something else entirely. Eyes wide, skin streaked with dirt and red lines, breaths coming in sharp gasps. Some held captives, trembling with pride and shock. Others stood empty-handed, heads lowered, already imagining the disappointment waiting back home. Older warriors came by to clap them on the shoulders or bark a harsh laugh. "Not bad," they'd say, or "better luck next time." In these short, clipped words, a lifetime of judgment lived. Each boy replayed every move in his mind, wondering which tiny mistake might have cost him that prized capture. At night, under smoky stars, they sat around small fires. Some stared into the flames, silent and distant. Others bragged loudly, their voices echoing into the darkness, trying to drown out the echoes of the day's screams. One boy might lift his hands to the sky, thanking the gods for letting him return. Another would poke at the ground with a stick, wondering how close he had come to becoming an offering himself. For some, this first battle planted a seed of hunger. They wanted more glory, more feathers, more whispers of their name in the marketplace. For others, it planted a quiet dread that gnawed at them in the quiet moments, when the drums were gone, and the only sound was their own heartbeat thumping against the mat. By dawn, they knew there would be more. More fields, more captives, more chances to prove they were more than just boys from smoky courtyards and narrow canals. And as the city slowly woke, with women grinding maize and merchants calling out the day's prices, these young warriors lay awake, staring at the first light slipping through the cracks, wondering who they might become next. Once they returned to the city, life didn't pause to let them catch their breath. The marketplace still bustled, kids still chased stray dogs, and old women still argued over the price of chili peppers. But for those boys who had just stepped off the battlefield, everything felt different. Colors seemed sharper, sounds felt louder, and every smell, sweet or sour, clung to their skin like wet clothes. They carried their victories and failures on their backs, sometimes literally, dragging their captives through crowded streets. Neighbors peeked from doorways, some cheering, some whispering. Every glance felt like a small knife, cutting deep, leaving invisible scars that would never truly heal. At home, families prepared welcome fires and special meals. Mothers moved quietly, eyes darting to their sons with a mix of pride and fear. Fathers spoke less, but their hands hovered nearby, ready to offer a rough pat on the shoulder or a silent nod. The returning boys were no longer simply sons or brothers. They were young warriors now, forever changed by what they had seen and done. Those who returned empty-handed carried a different weight. Their steps slower, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. They felt the heavy gaze of the community, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Why didn't you bring someone back? In the corners of the city, old men shared stories of their own first failures, trying to soften the blow. But the shame clung like a stubborn shadow. Ceremonies followed soon after. Fires lit the night sky, and drums echoed into the moonlit canals. Captives were dressed and painted, guided toward their fates. For the young warriors, standing nearby with chests puffed and hands still trembling, it was a moment of both triumph and dread. The smell of burning copal mixed with sweat and the coppery tang of blood hung heavy, weaving through every heartbeat. In those moments, each boy felt the gods watching, felt the ancestors breathing down their necks. Some closed their eyes, whispering silent thanks or bargaining for strength. Others stared straight ahead, jaws tight, trying to keep the storm inside from spilling out in front of their peers. Once the ceremonies ended, the city returned to its steady pulse. The same morning calls of market sellers, the same laughter drifting from small doorways. But within each young warrior, something new pulsed just under the skin. A flicker of hunger for the next battle, or a seed of doubt that twisted in the quiet hours before dawn. Some boys spent nights replaying every swing and every mischance. They imagined what might have happened if they had lunged faster, shouted louder, or been just a bit braver. Those questions crawled under their blankets, keeping them awake long after the fires burned down to glowing embers. Others felt the sweet rush of confidence. They strutted through alleys, adjusting the new feathers in their hair or the fresh paint on their arms. You could see it in the way they walked, a new rhythm in their steps, a new brightness in their eyes. They had touched the edge of something dangerous and come back alive. That alone felt like magic. In the heart of the night, when even the dogs stopped barking, a few boys would slip out to the rooftops. They'd lie flat on the warm tiles, staring at the stars, whispering dreams to the moon. Dreams of greater battles, brighter cloaks, more cheers from the crowd. They imagined their names echoing across the city, carried on the wind like a sacred chant. The next morning always arrived too quickly. There were more drills to run, more weapons to sharpen, more rituals to learn. Because while they had survived their first taste of real combat, everyone knew it wouldn't be the last. Beyond the city walls, other warriors were sharpening their own blades, chanting their own songs to gods that listened just as eagerly. And so, even as the city bustled and the sun rose soft and golden, each young warrior carried a private storm inside, a mix of fear and fire, of shame and pride, a quiet promise to themselves. Next time, they would be faster, stronger, braver. Next time, they would come back with more than just stories swirling in their heads. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. After each campaign season, a different kind of training began. Boys practiced songs and dances meant to honor the gods, their feet moving over packed earth as drums marked the rhythm of their future. Voices rose into the sky, merging into something bigger than fear or pride. Together, they wove a net of sound, one that was supposed to catch the attention of the gods looking down from the stars. During feasts, young warriors learned to sit beside elders, absorbing whispers about strategy, alliances, and family feuds stretching back generations. Between bites of spicy tamales and sips of sour pulque, they discovered that warfare wasn't just a matter of who swung the sharpest blade. It was politics, pride, revenge, and even love, all tangled together in a thick knot no one could completely unravel. As they got older, they started to notice more than just enemies on the battlefield. Eyes lingered longer on a girl passing with a basket of maize or a flash of a shy smile from behind a market stall. But the rules were clear. No marriage until you had proven yourself in battle. Love was another prize, waiting at the end of a long, dangerous road paved with sweat and blood. Some nights, they would sneak out to the canals, floating on silent boats under a blanket of stars. The moon lit up the water like a silver path, and in those quiet hours, they dared to speak their fears aloud. "What if I don't come back next time?" one might whisper. Another would laugh too loudly, trying to shake off the chill in his bones. These confessions dissolved into the night air, carried away by soft ripples and the hush of distant frogs. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. As they lined up at the gates, ready to march out into the unknown once more, they stood taller, faces set like carved stone, eyes fixed on the horizon. But if you looked closely, you might see a small tremor in a hand, a quick glance toward the sky, as if asking for one last sign that everything would turn out all right. In that moment, between the final drumbeat and the first step forward, they were no longer just sons, brothers, or students. They had become the storm they once feared, the sharp edge of a blade, the quiet promise whispered to the gods in the dark. And together, they stepped into the dawn, ready to become the stories they had grown up hearing, each heartbeat a silent drum of its own. The battlefield felt like a second home before long. Dirt and blood clung to the young warriors like an old friend, and the roar of battle became a twisted kind of music echoing in their ears long after the last spear fell. Each fight turned them into something harder, sharper. Yet somewhere deep inside, a flicker of that wide-eyed boy still hid, shivering in the dark. Marching toward an enemy city at dawn, they looked almost beautiful in the low light. Feathers shimmered, Shields caught every stray sunbeam, and fresh paint glowed on their faces like war masks come alive. The city gates loomed ahead, carved and decorated with bold patterns, promising both riches and danger. You could almost hear the gods holding their breath, waiting to see who would rise and who would fall. As they formed ranks, hearts beat like thunder trapped under ribs. Songs rose up, each note vibrating in the bones, weaving courage into shaky hands. A young warrior might grip his spear so tightly that knuckles turned white, his mind replaying every lesson learned in the warrior's schoolyard. Each swing and dodge drilled into his bones, now waiting for the real test. When the charge began, time bent. Screams mixed with the pounding of feet, the bright clash of metal, the dull thud of shields breaking. The first few seconds always felt endless, each heartbeat stretching out into a lifetime. A wild push forward, faces painted in terror and fire, arms swinging with every ounce of strength left in their bones. Some warriors moved like panthers, sliding between blades, eyes locked onto a single prize, a living enemy to capture. Others stumbled, caught in the swirl of chaos, hoping only to survive one more breath, one more step. Dirt flew up, mixing with sweat and blood, turning the air into a thick, choking fog. Those who succeeded in capturing someone felt a strange rush that was part triumph, part horror. The enemy struggled, spit curses, eyes burning with rage and fear. But for the young warrior, that grip on an opponent's wrist felt like holding a piece of the sun. Dangerous, blinding, and impossibly alive. Once the dust settled, the field turned eerily quiet. Birds circled overhead, waiting for scraps. Warriors stood panting, weapons dripping, some with captives tied and trembling beside them. Others knelt alone, heads hanging low, hands still shaking from the storm that had just passed. Back at the city, the welcome looked like a festival and a funeral rolled into one. Flowers lined the streets, drums thumped like giant heartbeats, and incense smoke painted swirling ghosts in the air. Neighbors watched as the warriors passed, measuring each face, each trophy. Pride and pity mixed in every pair of eyes, weaving invisible threads between every spectator and every fighter. Victorious young warriors received feathers and tokens of honor, small treasures that sparkled against their sweat-soaked skin. They strutted through the crowd, spirits soaring, hearts buzzing with the electric hum of newfound glory. Mothers wept openly, fathers grinned with tight jaws, too proud to show tears. But for those who returned empty-handed, the walk felt endless. Every step weighed down by silent judgment, each breath a reminder of what hadn't been achieved. No bright feathers, no triumphant chants, just the echo of footsteps and the heavy knowledge that next time, they'd need to fight harder, move faster, believe more fiercely. That night, fires lit up every courtyard, laughter rose and fell, and songs drifted like fireflies into the darkness. The young warriors gathered around, some loud and boastful, others quiet and reflective, staring into the flames as if they might find the shape of tomorrow hiding in the coals. And above them all, the stars listened silently, blinking like watchful eyes. Somewhere out there, the gods waited, always hungry for bravery, always ready to claim another heartbeat in the dance of blood and spirit. The days after a big battle felt like stepping into a strange dream. The city buzzed with energy, yet for the warriors, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Each footstep echoed louder, each laugh felt sharper, each smell of roasted maize and burning incense seemed to wrap tighter around their heads. Young warriors often spent these days lost in a fog of conflicting feelings. One moment they basked in the warmth of praise, imagining themselves as living legends. The next, they were haunted by flashes of the fight, the shriek of a wounded enemy, the sudden weight of a body crashing against them. the feel of blood slicking their palms. Despite the noise of celebration, a hush lived inside each of them. They carried invisible ghosts on their shoulders, whispering old doubts and new fears into their ears when the city's music died down for the night. Some tried to drown those whispers with pulque, laughing too hard at every joke, clapping each other's backs until the sting felt like a small relief. Others found comfort in rituals. They visited temples, leaving bundles of flowers and small offerings. A bit of cacao, a few beads, each gift a soft apology to the gods, or maybe to themselves. At the main temple steps, old priests chanted in deep, rolling voices, inviting the spirits to feast and watch over the living. The young warriors knelt in the smoky air, eyes closed tight, hearts drumming out private promises. Between ceremonies, there were new lessons to learn. Captives needed to be prepared for offerings, and the young warriors were taught how to handle them with both care and authority. It was a delicate dance, strong enough to keep control, gentle enough not to damage the prize. Every cut and mark mattered. Each scar on a captive's skin became part of a story meant for the gods. These tasks weren't just chores. They were the final steps of a ritual that transformed a boy into a full warrior. Handling a captive was proof of courage, a living testament to his skill and bravery. And in each heavy breath, each trembling hand, a young man felt himself crossing an invisible line, stepping deeper into a world where there was no turning back. At home, families waited. Mothers prepared warm food and soft mats, trying to patch the pieces of their sons that didn't show on the outside. Fathers nodded silently, tossing another log onto the fire, their eyes reflecting pride and an ancient, gnawing worry. Even the youngest siblings felt the shift, peeking from doorways with wide eyes, sensing that something big and mysterious had settled over the household. Nights carried their own kind of magic. Fires glowed like tiny suns in each courtyard, and shadows danced along the walls as elders retold the old warrior tales. Stories of the first great leaders who captured not just enemies but entire cities, who returned covered in feathers so bright they looked like walking rainbows. The young men listened, their faces lit by both flame and ambition, each word slipping into their veins like a sweet, dangerous drink. In those quiet hours, small groups would sneak away to rooftops or quiet corners by the canals. There, they dared to whisper their real fears. What if I fail again? What if I never bring back another captive? What if next time I don't come back at all? The moon watched over them like a patient grandmother, catching each secret in her pale hands before letting them drift into the night air. By morning, their masks returned, faces painted, backs straight, voices loud. They trained harder than before, each swing of a blade or thrust of a spear carrying the silent promise. I will not falter again. I will bring back more. I will become the name they whisper around the fire for years to come. Through it all, the city pulsed on, alive and hungry for new stories. Merchants haggled over chili and fish, children chased stray dogs through narrow alleys, and old women gossiped with knowing smiles. Yet somewhere above all the chatter, you could almost hear the gods humming, waiting for the next heartbeat to offer up, the next brave soul to shape into legend. Seasons changed, but the rhythm stayed the same. The city's heart beat in time with the warriors' footsteps, each campaign a new chance to carve a name into history. Before each departure, the air turned thick with incense and whispered blessings. Mothers braided charms into their sons' hair, little knots of hope hidden under feathers and paint. The warriors gathered at dawn, their breath fogging in the cool morning, eyes locked on the horizon. Some prayed softly, hands brushing charms hanging at their chests. Others joked and shoved each other, their laughter too sharp, like glass about to crack. Every single one of them carried a private map of scars, each line a quiet lesson learned the hard way. Marching out felt like slipping into another skin. The city faded behind them, its chatter replaced by the hush of open fields and the distant call of birds. The road was dusty and harsh, every mile a reminder that comfort was a luxury left behind with warm hearths and family meals. Feet blistered, shoulders burned under the weight of shields and weapons. Yet their heads stayed high, eyes searching for the first sign of enemy smoke curling into the sky. At night, they set up small fires under a blanket of stars, the glow flickering on painted faces. Stories rolled out in soft waves, blending into the hum of crickets and the rustle of grass. Someone might share a memory of the first time they held a blade, or the moment they saw a friend fall beside them. The fire listened without judgment, crackling gently with each secret dropped into its orange mouth. Some nights, the warriors traced shapes in the dirt, maps of future conquests sketched with hopeful fingers. They imagined the cheers waiting back home, the bright eyes of neighbors, the proud tears of mothers who would call them heroes. Between the jokes and boasts, there was always a quiet edge, the silent knowing that each plan might be the last one made under a peaceful sky. When the enemy city finally appeared on the horizon, pulses quickened. The smell of smoke, the shimmer of watchfires, the distant echo of enemy songs drifting across the fields. It all settled into their bones like an old friend returning. Armor rattled softly, breaths came quicker, and the ground seemed to hum beneath their feet. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. Some warriors fought like dancers, every move a sharp, graceful arc. Others stumbled, swinging wildly, desperate just to stay standing. Somewhere in the chaos, young men wrestled with captives, feeling the hot pulse of another life under their hands. Every grip, every slip, every gasp mattered. One mistake could mean a lifetime of shame or an early meeting with the gods they had prayed to so many nights before. When the dust cleared, the field lay littered with stories. Some warriors stood tall, dragging prisoners, faces lit with a hard, shining joy. Others slumped alone, weapons hanging, eyes lost in some far-off place. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and the bitter tang of burned offerings drifting from makeshift altars. As they turned back toward the city, feet dragging in the soft earth, each warrior carried a new weight. Victors felt the burn of pride and the pinch of future expectations pressing tight against their ribs. The defeated carried a quieter burden, one stitched together from missed chances and silent vows whispered under the moon. Back inside the city walls, preparations for their return began. Women swept courtyards, fathers stirred thick stews, children peeked around corners, hoping to spot a glimpse of their returning heroes. The city pulsed with anticipation, each heart ticking in rhythm with the distant sound of drums echoing from the hills. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of fire and violet, the warriors approached home once again, their silhouettes long and thin against the glowing horizon. Each step a promise, each breath a silent echo of the wild dance they had survived. When they stepped through the city gates, a wave of sound washed over them. Cheers mixed with drumbeats. The scent of flowers battled the iron tang of blood, still clinging to their armor. Children ran ahead, tossing petals, their eyes wide with awe and curiosity. Older folks watched carefully, measuring each young man's posture, scanning for new feathers, fresh scars, or the trembling signs of unspoken fears. The triumphant warriors carried their captives proudly, heads held high, backs straight despite the exhaustion burning through their bones. Every step felt heavy but electric, as if they walked on a path woven from lightning and prayers. They could almost taste the victory, sweet and sharp, hanging on their tongues like honey spiked with chili. Behind them, those who had returned empty-handed followed more slowly, each footfall echoing in a deeper, sadder key. Their faces were masks, trying to hide the storm raging inside. They looked away from the flower petals, the children's bright eyes, and the knowing glances of old warriors who remembered that sting all too well. The welcome ceremonies began quickly. Fires crackled in every courtyard, painting walls with gold and shadow. Musicians played tunes that curled into the sky like smoke, wrapping around the moon and slipping into the ears of distant gods. Families crowded close, whispering blessings and secrets into the flickering air. Victorious warriors received tokens, bright feathers, woven sashes, and beads strung carefully by family hands. Each gift felt like a piece of home, a small promise that someone was waiting no matter what the next battle brought. Mothers pressed food into their sons' hands, warm tortillas, steaming bowls of thick broth, hoping each bite would patch the unseen cracks in their spirits. As night deepened, stories began to weave through the air. Some warriors shouted wild retellings of their fights, embellishing each swing and every narrow escape. Laughter burst out in quick, sharp sparks, echoing off the stone walls. Others sat quietly by the fire, eyes lost in the orange glow, replaying the day in a loop that refused to end. In the shadows, fathers and elders exchanged quiet nods, their faces carved with both pride and worry. They knew the dance didn't stop here. This was just one step on a long road paved with sharpened obsidian and sweet songs meant to hide the blade beneath. Farther from the fires, young children played their own mock battles, sticks clashing in high-pitched chaos, voices calling out future victories only they could see. Mothers watched, hearts twisting with hope and fear, knowing one day those playful cries would turn into real war chants echoing across real fields. In small corners, some warriors sat alone, turning new feathers over in their fingers. Each soft strand a reminder of a captured enemy, a small echo of screams and silent prayers offered under a burning sky. Some pressed them to their lips, eyes closed, as if asking the gods for forgiveness or strength, or both. When the moon climbed high and most fires dimmed into soft coals, a hush settled over the city. The warriors drifted into uneasy sleep, muscles twitching, minds haunted by both the glory and the ghosts. Dreams crawled into their blankets, weaving bright feathers with dark shadows, promises of future triumphs with quiet whispers of failures still to come. Yet even in the deepest sleep, a spark glowed inside each young man, the hunger for more battles, more feathers, more cheers rising like waves over the marketplace. A fierce, quiet oath that next time, they would run faster, strike harder, return with heavier arms and lighter hearts. The city itself seemed to breathe along with them, each narrow alley and each courtyard echoing their secret vows. And as the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the sky, painting rooftops in soft pink and gold, they stirred once more, ready to step back into the dance they were born for, the endless, bloody, beautiful waltz between life, death, and the gods who watched from above. When the sun fully rose, spilling gold across the rooftops, the warriors shook off their dreams and stepped into the new day like actors returning to a stage. Their bodies ached, but their eyes held that quiet spark, the same light that flickered in temple fires and glowed in the hearts of old statues staring down from mossy altars. Breakfast was simple. A rough tortilla, maybe some beans, sometimes a small piece of fruit if the gods were kind. But each bite felt sacred, shared in near silence, as if words might scare away the thin thread of strength holding them upright. They watched each other closely, reading small movements, catching the tremor in a hand or the moment a gaze drifted too far into yesterday's blood-soaked memories. After the meal, they gathered in the training yard, weapons clutched in calloused hands, shields resting against their legs like loyal dogs. Instructors circled, eyes sharp, voices low and firm. There were no soft starts. They jumped straight into footwork drills, each pivot and lunge a reminder that life owed them nothing. Every breath had to be earned again and again. Young warriors tried to mimic the older ones, watching the tilt of a head, the flick of a wrist, the invisible rhythm that turned a simple block into a graceful dance. Mistakes drew quick correction, a slap on the back or a barked word that felt like an arrow straight to the gut. But even as sweat poured down their backs, there was a strange joy hidden in the pain, proof that they were alive, that their bodies could still answer the silent call of war. In the quieter corners, boys practiced war songs. Voices rose and fell like ocean waves, words weaving stories of storm gods and burning fields, of brothers lost and enemies taken. Each note felt like a stitch in a giant, invisible tapestry stretched across the sky. Even those who sang off-key felt part of something ancient and vast, something bigger than the ache in their arms or the bruises blooming across their ribs. Between drills, small groups formed, whispering jokes to hide the edge in their voices. Someone might toss a pebble at a friend's foot or boast about the dream they had where they single-handedly defeated an entire enemy line. Laughter echoed briefly, a thin ribbon of light slipping between heavy clouds. But always, underneath, there was that shared understanding. Soon, they would leave again, and some jokes would turn into eulogies whispered by firesides. As the day burned hotter, shadows shrank, and the smell of dust mixed with the sharp tang of sweat. Instructors called for sparring matches, pairing boys who knew each other too well. Each match was part dance, part confession. Secrets spilled in the clash of wood and the quick intake of breath. Watching them, you could almost hear the future calling, each block and strike writing new lines into a story only the gods might read. After the matches, there was a short pause, a moment when the world seemed to hold its breath. Boys bent over water bowls, splashing their faces, eyes closed tight against the stinging coolness. Some traced lines on their arms, marking imaginary victories, planning future conquests in the silent language of scars. When the final drumbeat signaled the end of training, they shuffled back toward the barracks. Feet dragged slightly, shoulders drooped for just a heartbeat before someone cracked another joke or started a soft chant that spread like fire through the group. The city outside kept humming, market calls, distant flutes, the flap of birds taking off from rooftops. But for these young warriors, the soundscape felt both close and impossibly far away. As they settled in for the evening, each one carried an invisible pack on his back, a mix of pride, fear, longing, and the restless itch for another chance to prove they belonged among the legends. And when night finally draped itself over the city like a thick, comforting cloak, they drifted off into dreams of feathered helmets, bright drums, and the silent promise of tomorrow's battles waiting just beyond the dawn. As stars blinked awake one by one above the city, fires started to bloom in every courtyard. The glow touched walls and faces, making every scar and every laugh look softer, almost gentle. The warriors gathered around those fires, knees pulled close, arms resting on worn shields. Some chewed slowly on roasted maize, others sipped thick, smoky drinks that warmed their bellies and loosened their tongues. Tonight felt different. The air buzzed with stories that refused to stay trapped in throats any longer. One young warrior leaned forward, eyes wide. As he described the moment he slipped behind an enemy, breath shaking, heart pounding like a wild drum. His hands moved with each word, tracing invisible strikes, each gesture a shadow of that bright, terrifying dance. Across the fire, Another warrior mimicked the cry of a fallen foe, earning quick bursts of laughter that rolled through the group like a sudden breeze on a hot day. The laughter echoed, sharp and fleeting, but it left behind a softness in their eyes, a reminder that under all the feathers and paint, they were still young men craving warmth and connection. A few sat in silence, staring into the flames, seeing something no one else could. In those orange tongues of fire, they saw old mistakes, half-finished prayers, faces of friends who hadn't made it home. Their fingers fidgeted with feathers or small charms, eyes glassy, the words they wanted to say swallowed again and again. Somewhere nearby, an elder hummed an old song, low and steady, the notes curling around the group like a protective spell. The melody carried memories of dawn raids and moonlit marches, of brothers who once stood shoulder to shoulder and of empty beds left behind. Even those who pretended not to listen felt the hum crawl up their spines, slipping into old cracks in their armor. After a while, one by one, they began to drift away from the fire, legs stiff, eyes heavy. Some found quiet corners to sleep, clutching weapons as if they might need them before the moon slid too far across the sky. Others leaned against each other, heads nodding, breath slow and deep, dreams already starting to weave around them. The city outside the courtyards pulsed with its own midnight song. Cats slipped across rooftops, merchants packed away the last of their wares, and small candles flickered in windows where mothers whispered final blessings to the darkness. Somewhere, a lone drum tapped a soft rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing through the narrow streets. In those sleeping moments, the young warriors traveled elsewhere. They soared above the lakes on the wings of giant eagles. They wrestled shadows under a moon as bright as a god's eye. They saw themselves crowned with feathers, surrounded by chants that rose like thunder. In dreams, no one failed, no one fell. In dreams, they were immortal. But the dawn always came, peeling back the night with quiet fingers. The first rooster's call cracked the silence, followed by the shuffle of feet and the clink of clay cups being set out for morning drinks. Slowly, the warriors blinked themselves awake, stretching sore limbs, tasting the ghosts of their dreams on their tongues. With each new day, they slipped back into the routine, washing at the cold basin, tying cloth around their waists, checking the edges of their blades with careful fingers. Outside, the city yawned and stretched too, markets filling with color and noise, temple steps shining in the first gold of morning light. Through it all, each young warrior carried a private map of hopes and doubts stitched into his heart. A secret vow whispered to the wind as they stepped into the yard, heads high, spirits buzzing with that same restless question. Who will I become today? And so, the dance continued. A quiet waltz with fear, a roaring march toward glory, an endless echo of feet on dusty ground, always moving, always dreaming, always waiting for the next story to unfold under the watchful eyes of the stars. Days turned into seasons, and seasons slipped into years almost without warning. What started as the wild energy of boys had now settled into the quiet, dangerous confidence of seasoned warriors. Their movements became smoother, their eyes sharper, their laughs edged with the knowledge of things only seen beyond the city walls. New recruits watched them closely, trying to catch the small secrets in the tilt of a chin or the roll of a shoulder before a swing. The older warriors never spoke much about their scars. They didn't have to. Each line on their skin hummed a story loud enough for anyone paying attention. A quick glance at a twisted knuckle or a jagged cut near the ribs could tell you everything you needed to know about courage, fear, and the price of a single heartbeat too slow. In the city, life pulsed on. Markets spilled over with bright cloth and the spicy perfume of fresh chilies and cacao. Children ran laughing through the alleys, imitating their older brothers, wooden sticks clashing like echoing ghosts of distant battles. Old women shook their heads, smiling into their weaving as if they'd heard all these stories before and knew how each one might end. At home, the warriors carried a different weight. Feathers and painted sashes hung from walls like silent trophies. Some rooms smelled faintly of herbs and ash, where quiet prayers for safety mixed with the sharp memory of past battles. Wives laid out small meals, watched their husbands closely, reading every twitch in a brow or pause in a breath. Children peeked from behind door frames, half curious, half afraid, as they traced the strange, powerful shape of this person they called father. During the dry season, ceremonies stretched long into the evenings. Fires burned high, drums boomed into the warm night air, and dancers twisted their bodies into shapes meant to please the gods and remind the people of old victories. Warriors sat in small circles, sharing thick drinks that made their tongues loose and their memories louder. Between jokes and half-laughed curses, their words sometimes stumbled into darker corners. Stories of narrow escapes, of a friend's last breath caught in the dust, of enemies whose eyes still haunted them in the quiet hours before dawn. Each confession hung in the air for a moment before dissolving into another roar of laughter or a sharp clap on the shoulder. No one lingered too long in the shadows, not out loud at least. On some nights, a few would wander out to the edge of the city, where fields kissed the forests and the wind carried the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke. They stood there in the half-dark, looking up at the moon, each man alone even as they stood together. In those moments, stripped of songs and ceremony, they felt small, smaller than the rivers winding through the valleys, smaller than the stars spread like spilled salt across the sky. One might murmur a quiet prayer, another might hum an old war song so softly it barely stirred the air. Some just listened to their own heartbeats, steady and strong now, but always a little uncertain of what tomorrow might ask of them. By the time they returned to their sleeping mats, the city had quieted into soft whispers and snoring breaths. Warriors lay on their backs, staring at the thatched ceiling or the open sky, minds drifting through old battles and future dreams. Fingers traced familiar scars like counting beads on an invisible necklace, each one a silent promise to keep moving forward. And so, even as the moon dipped low and the first thin lines of morning painted the world silver, the warriors turned on their sides, exhaled into the hush, and carried their secret oaths into sleep, ready to wake again, rise again, and become the thunder rolling just beyond the edge of the horizon. When the next campaign season arrived, it slipped in almost silently, like mist crawling over a lake at dawn. The warriors felt it before they heard it. A tightness in the chest, a restless buzz in the fingers, the way their feet seemed to itch for dusty roads and the sound of distant drums. Even the city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first shout, the first march, the first new story to take shape in the cool morning light. Preparation began before the sun even dared peek above the rooftops. Weapons were checked and rechecked, edges sharpened until they gleamed like captured moonlight. Feathers were cleaned, paint pots stirred, charms tied carefully into hair and onto belts. Each movement felt part ritual, part habit, a dance learned over years of sweat, pain, and quiet victories whispered into the night. At the warriors' school, younger boys watched wide-eyed as their older brothers moved through the yard. Every swing of a blade, every flex of a scarred arm, looked to them like magic, the secret language of legends being written in real time. They dreamed of their own future battles, imagined themselves stepping through smoke and cheers, names rising like sparks into the sky. Older warriors shared final meals with their families in the soft hush before departure. Wives brushed away stray hairs from foreheads, fingers lingering a moment longer on sunburned cheeks. Children pressed small gifts into calloused hands. A woven bracelet, a lucky stone, a scrap of bright cloth, each one heavy with the quiet weight of love and fear. Then came the march, streets filled with the smell of incense and the sound of low, steady chants. Drums set the pace, echoing in bones and bouncing off the walls like rolling thunder. Every step felt at once heavy and light, carrying both the promise of glory and the whisper of danger. Some eyes looked straight ahead, locked on the horizon where dreams waited. Others flicked sideways, catching a last glimpse of home, a final anchor before the tide pulled them away. Beyond the city, fields stretched wide and open, the sky above so big it felt like it might swallow them whole. Warriors moved like a single living beast, breathing together, feet pounding out a secret code in the earth. Every so often, someone would let out a sudden yell, sharp and bright, cutting through the dusty air like a blade through cloth. It was a sound of defiance, of excitement, of the raw edge where fear and hunger for glory met. Nights on the road turned into living poems. Fires crackled low, shadows danced on painted faces, and the smell of roasted maize or spicy stew drifted softly into the dark. Stories spilled out between bites, each word glowing like an ember in the circle of light. Someone might boast about an impossible capture, another might laugh about a close call with a wild boar, and somewhere in the mix, a quiet voice always rose, weaving a song to carry their spirits into sleep. Some warriors sat apart, eyes fixed on the stars, tracing constellations like old paths to lost brothers. Their fingers moved over small charms, lips moving in silent prayers or confessions too tender to speak in daylight. In that hush, the world felt both endless and impossibly close, as if each warrior carried the entire sky inside his ribs, waiting to spill out at the next dawn. When sleep finally crept in, it arrived like a thief, stealing them away mid-laugh, mid-thought, mid-song. Bodies curled into cloaks, arms wrapped protectively over spears or shields. Dreams flickered behind closed eyes, bright feathers, roaring crowds, warm fires, and the endless drumbeat that never quite left their bones. And with each sunrise, they rose again, feet sore, voices hoarse, hearts thumping with the old question. Would this be the day they found new glory or fell into the silent embrace of the gods? Either way, they stepped forward, into the wide open dawn, into the story that waited just beyond the edge of the light. The first clash of battle always landed like a lightning strike, sudden, electric, impossible to ignore. Dust rose in choking waves, blurring friend from foe, turning bright feathers into gray ghosts. The drums thundered in the distance, a heartbeat for the chaos unfolding under the high, watchful sky. Blades met shields with a sound sharp enough to make bones shiver. Warriors twisted and ducked, feet sliding over trampled earth, breath tearing in and out like a wild animal caught in a trap. In those moments, the world narrowed to a single point: survive, capture, return. There was no room for doubts, no time for soft memories of home fires and morning tortillas. Just the sting of sweat in the eyes and the raw roar of survival echoing in the chest. Young warriors moved with a kind of fierce grace, muscles remembering every drill under the hot sun. Hands reached for wrists, elbows, ankles, anything to pull an enemy off balance, to claim a living prize instead of a silent body. The ultimate victory wasn't to end a life, but to bring one back, proof of skill and courage, a living whisper to the gods above. In the swirl of dust and screams, friendships formed like sudden sparks. Two warriors might find themselves back to back, breathing hard, exchanging a quick, wordless nod before charging forward again. For a heartbeat, they were more than warriors. They were brothers, holding each other up against the tidal wave of swinging blades and clashing shields. When a young warrior managed to secure a captive, the feelings surged through him like a flood. Fear and relief tangled in his chest. hands trembling even as they tightened around the captive's arm. Every step back toward the line felt like walking through thick mud, each heartbeat a hammer strike against the ribs. Eyes darted around, half expecting to be struck down before crossing the invisible finish line between survival and legend. As the battle slowly bled itself dry, the field turned quiet in patches. Cries faded, dust settled into low, heavy clouds. Warriors stood in the haze, some gripping prisoners, others leaning on spears, heads bowed as if listening for an echo only they could hear. The gods felt close in that quiet, as if they had walked among the fighters, tasting every drop of sweat and fear, deciding who would return home and who would join the stars. Those who failed to capture someone carried a different silence. Their steps dragged, eyes refused to meet the sky. Each feather felt heavier, each breath like swallowing stones. In the long walk back, every shuffle echoed their private promise. Next time, I will not return empty-handed. As they re-entered the city, drums greeted them with a low, rolling thunder. The streets buzzed with anxious energy, neighbors craning for a glimpse, children clinging to door frames, wide-eyed and hungry for stories. Some warriors marched proudly, captives stumbling behind them, while others slipped through the crowd like shadows, hoping to vanish before the questions started. Ceremonies flickered to life as soon as the first fires were lit. Families pressed close, arms reaching, eyes searching for proof that their sons, brothers, and husbands had made it home whole. Some offered food with shaking hands, voices quivering as they named old blessings. Others traced fingers over new scars, reading them like a secret script written just for them. That night, the city glowed from hundreds of small fires. Songs spiraled into the sky, twisting through the dark like curious spirits. Warriors huddled together, some loud with drink and victory, others quiet, staring at flames as if they might find forgiveness or courage hiding among the embers. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. In the hush that settled after the final chants faded, the warriors felt the world breathe around them. The city, still humming softly, wrapped itself around each returning fighter like a thick, invisible blanket. Small sounds became sharp, the crack of a twig underfoot, the rustle of a cloak, the soft drip of water from a rooftop. Every detail felt magnified in those quiet moments, echoing inside their tired bones. Morning crept in slow and shy, sliding between clay walls and flickering fires, washing the courtyards in pale gold. Warriors stirred on their mats, stretching stiff legs, rolling shoulders still tender from heavy shields and long marches. Some lay still a moment longer, eyes tracing the first hints of color in the sky, breaths slow and deep, as if gathering courage for another day. Breakfast was simple, but each bite tasted like a small victory. Warm maize cakes, earthy beans, maybe a hint of spicy sauce if someone felt generous. Laughter bubbled here and there, low and gentle, like the first small waves before a storm. Jokes came easier in the soft morning glow, words bouncing off stone walls and drifting into the open air like tiny birds testing their wings. Older warriors checked gear in the corner, fingers sliding over blade edges, eyes squinting at fine cracks in wooden shields. They moved with the calm confidence of men who had danced close to death and returned, each movement an echo of countless mornings just like this one. Younger warriors watched them closely, mimicking small gestures, trying to absorb that unspoken magic. After the meal, they drifted toward the training yard. The ground was still cool under their feet, the dust waiting patiently for the day's first scuffle. Voices rose in soft calls, a few whistles slicing the air as instructors gathered them into loose groups. Today was for refining the edges. No wild charges, no roaring chants. Just small, perfect movements repeated until the body remembered them better than the mind ever could. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. During short breaks, some warriors shared water. The cool liquid passed hand to hand like a sacred offering. Others leaned on spears, shoulders touching lightly, sharing quick jokes or pointing out flaws in each other's stances with a grin. Each word, each look, stitched them tighter together. A web of friendship spun under the watchful gaze of old gods and curious stars. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. As the sun climbed higher, the city beyond the yard pulsed with its own life. Merchants shouted from stalls, children's laughter echoed from alleyways, and the scent of roasted peppers drifted on the breeze. But for the warriors, the world narrowed to this small circle of dust and sweat and shared breath. Here, they didn't have to be heroes or legends or future ancestors. Here, they were just men learning to hold their ground, to move as one, to listen to the silent drum beating in each chest. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. The next morning arrived like a gentle hand on the shoulder, soft but insistent. Warriors rose slowly, joints cracking, eyes blinking against the pale dawn. The air smelled of damp earth and the faint, comforting scent of smoke drifting from early breakfast fires. Somewhere, a bird called out, breaking the hush with a single clear note that felt almost like a dare to get moving. As they washed in cool basins, each splash carried away a layer of yesterday's dust, but not the memories. Those stayed hidden under the skin, quiet and stubborn, flickering to life in the back of their minds. They tied cloth wraps around waists, painted fresh lines on their faces, each stroke a silent promise. I am still here. I am still strong. By the time they stepped into the yard, the city had begun to wake up fully. Market voices floated over the walls, mingling with the rhythmic clack of grinding stones and the distant giggles of children playing warrior games with sticks. Life pulsed beyond the gates, but inside the yard, time bent into its own secret rhythm. Today, the drills were slower. Instructors walked among them, correcting elbow angles, adjusting foot positions, tapping a shoulder here, flicking a wrist there. Each correction felt like a blessing and a challenge rolled into one. Younger warriors tried to hide winces, determined to hold form, to become as solid and fluid as river stones smoothed by years of rushing water. Between movements, they shared glances that carried whole conversations. A slight nod meant respect. A quick smirk meant, I saw that slip. Even in silence, they wove tight ropes of brotherhood, threads that wrapped around the heart and held tight when the world beyond the walls turned sharp and loud. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. After a final chant echoed off the walls, they broke apart, moving toward the shade like a single tired animal. Water bowls passed from hand to hand, each sip shared with the same reverence as a sacred offering. Someone cracked a joke about a misstep, laughter bubbling up and spilling over, bright and sharp, slicing through the afternoon heat like a cool breeze. Lunch was simple, thick stews, soft tortillas, a few stolen moments of quiet. Warriors sat in small clusters, legs stretched out, heads tilted back toward the sky. Some picked at their food, minds drifting toward the next campaign. Others ate greedily, savoring each bite like it might be their last. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. The first clash always arrived like a storm, sudden and wild. Blades flashed, shields shuddered, shouts rose and tangled into a deafening wave. Dust curled up in thick clouds, turning midday into a gray twilight. In those moments, time lost its shape. A heartbeat could stretch forever, or an hour could vanish in a blink. As dusk crawled in on silent feet, fires sparked to life again, sending orange light flickering across their skin. Songs rose, low and winding, wrapping around them like soft cloaks. A few warriors stood apart, staring into flames, seeing both past and future flicker in each shifting tongue of fire. By the time stars punched tiny holes into the dark sky, the yard had fallen quiet. One by one, they slipped into sleep, dreams blooming behind closed eyes like midnight flowers. And though their bodies rested, deep inside, the drums still beat. Tomorrow, again. Tomorrow, stronger. Tomorrow, always. By the time the next sunrise spilled across the rooftops, they were already on their feet. The air carried a bite that hinted at changing seasons, a crisp promise that new battles and new stories waited just beyond the horizon. Each warrior moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned to trust both his own hands and the brothers standing beside him. The morning routine unfolded like a familiar dance. Buckles checked, straps tightened, fingers running over edges of blades, feeling for imperfections invisible to the eye. Feathers were adjusted, charms retied, paint reapplied with careful strokes. Every gesture was a small ritual, each one a silent reminder of past mornings and all the mornings still to come. Breakfast was taken in near silence. The taste of warm maize cakes, the sharp edge of chili, the earthy sweetness of beans, each bite grounded them, stitching them back to the world before they stepped once more into the river of dust and blood that defined their lives. Glances passed over bowls and cups, wordless but heavy with meaning. I see you. I am with you. Before they left, some slipped away for a moment of quiet. A hand pressed to an old carving on a wall, a whispered word into the morning breeze, a small offering of maize or cacao left at a corner shrine. These moments, barely long enough to catch a full breath, carried the weight of entire prayers. When they gathered at the edge of the yard, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Children peeked from behind corners, eyes wide and unblinking. Old women muttered blessings under their breath, fingers tracing invisible circles in the air. A few merchants paused mid-setup, eyes lingering on the line of painted faces and shimmering feathers, perhaps remembering their own brothers or sons lost to the same wide roads. Then, with a slow exhale, the warriors stepped forward. The earth seemed to shift beneath their feet, the first drumbeats rising in their chests before they even echoed across the rooftops. Each step pulled them deeper into that familiar rhythm. Heart pounding, mind sharpening, the world narrowing to a bright, single line stretching out toward the horizon. Along the way, they spoke in low murmurs. Quick jokes slipped between serious words, small sparks of laughter flashing like fireflies in the pre-dawn mist. Someone might brag about a new charm tied to his belt. Another might share a dream from the night before, half a warning, half a promise. These fragments stitched them together, turning a line of individuals into something closer to a single creature, alive and breathing in perfect, chaotic harmony. As the sun climbed, shadows stretched long across the fields. Birds wheeled high above, their calls slicing through the air like distant battle cries. The smell of turned earth and crushed grass clung to the warriors, mixing with sweat and the sharp bite of dried paint cracking under the heat. Breaks were short and rare. A quick sip of water, a handful of roasted maize, a moment to adjust gear before the call to move came again. Resting warriors leaned on each other, heads tilted back, eyes closed against the brightness. In those fleeting pauses, dreams of home flickered across their faces. A mother's laugh, the warm weight of a child on a knee, the way the city smelled at dusk. Yet even in those gentle daydreams, the edge remained. A tension beneath the skin, a hum in the bones. Each warrior carried it like a second heartbeat, a reminder that the next battle was always waiting, always hungry. When they finally settled for the night, fires bloomed again, small orange stars dotting the darkness. Songs rose in fits and starts. Laughter crackled and fell silent in turns. Some warriors traced scars under the moonlight. Others fell asleep mid-sentence, heads resting on rolled-up cloaks, breaths even and deep. Above them, the sky stretched wide and endless, the stars blinking down like ancient watchers who had seen every triumph and every loss, every promise made and every vow broken. And as eyelids fluttered closed and dreams began their slow, winding dance, one thought pulsed quietly in every chest. Tomorrow, the story begins again.